When corrupt cop realizes he made a huge mistake by arresting a young black woman, unaware her mother is a police captain, karma hits hard. What happens when a corrupt cop crosses the line and makes the biggest mistake of his career? Officer Jake Miller arrests a young woman in a quiet neighborhood, unaware that her mother is a high-ranking police captain. This intense drama escalates quickly as his abuse of power backfires spectacularly. Follow this gripping story as karma deals Jake the consequences of years of corruption, and justice is finally served. Will the truth finally bring down the walls of a broken system, or is this just the beginning of an even larger battle? You will soon find out. What happens when a police officer abuses his power, targeting the wrong person? What if that person has a powerful secret, a protector within the very system that seeks to oppress her? In this story of injustice, betrayal, and an unexpected twist of fate, a corrupt cop crosses a line he can't uncross. But can someone who lives above the law ever escape the consequences of his actions? And when karma strikes, how far does the fall from grace go? Officer Jake Miller sat in his squad car, staring lazily at the rows of suburban houses stretching out before him. To him, it was just another neighborhood. The kind of place where the streets were quiet, the lawns were perfect, and people felt safe. Well, most people. Jake had a different eye for things. His sense of safety had a darker meaning. To him, safety meant control. Control over who came, who went, and who stayed in their place. And when someone looked like they didn't belong, it didn't take much for Jake to assert his so-called authority. Then he saw her. A young woman, no older than 23, walking briskly along the sidewalk. She was carrying a grocery bag, her head held high, her pace steady. But something about her triggered Jake's attention. Maybe it was the confidence in her step, or maybe it was something simpler. Something he wouldn't admit to himself. Her skin color. Do corrupt cops always believe they can get away with their crimes? And how often does racism hide behind the mask of law and order? Jake had made a career out of profiling people like her. Young, black, confident, a mix that, in his twisted mind, meant trouble. He had gotten away with this kind of behavior for years, bullying and intimidating the defenseless, knowing that no one would challenge him. After all, who would believe a young woman over a police officer? He flicked on his lights and pulled up alongside her, leaning out the window. "Hey, stop right there." The young woman, startled by the sudden blare of the siren, turned to look at the cop car. Her instincts told her to stay calm, but a flood of emotion swept over her. Fear, anger, frustration. She had done nothing wrong, and yet here she was about to be treated like a criminal. Why? Because she didn't look like she belonged in this part of town? Her hands gripped the grocery bag tightly as she forced herself to remain composed. "Is there a problem, officer?" Jake eyed her up and down, his expression one of thinly veiled disdain. "You mind telling me what you're doing around here?" What kind of question was that? She lived here. But this wasn't new. How many times had she, her friends, her family been asked to explain why they were in certain spaces? How many times had their existence been questioned, as if they had to justify their right to be? She clenched her jaw. "I'm just coming home from the store. I live here." Jake's smirk deepened. "Oh yeah? Where's home? You got any ID on you?" What happens when the very people meant to protect you turn into predators? How do you fight back when the system is rigged against you? "I'm not carrying my ID. I'm just walking home." Jake's hand moved to rest on his holster, a subtle threat. He stepped out of the car now, towering over her. "You know, we've had some reports of suspicious activity in this area. You sure you're not up to anything?" Her heart raced. This was escalating too fast. She could see it in his eyes. He wasn't asking questions anymore. He was looking for a reason. A reason to flex his power, to show her that this was his world and she was just living in it at his mercy. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just trying to get home." But Jake wasn't listening. He'd already decided how this was going to go down. His fingers tightened around her arm. Hands on the hood. "Now." "What? What are you?" Before she could finish, Jake yanked her toward the squad car, slamming her body against the metal hood. The groceries scattered to the ground, cans rolling into the street. Her arms were twisted behind her back, the cold steel of the handcuffs biting into her wrists. Pain shot up her shoulders, but worse than the physical pain was the humiliation. Being treated like a criminal for simply walking home. "What are you doing? I haven't done anything wrong," she cried out, her voice sharp with a mixture of fear and outrage. But Jake didn't care. He shoved her into the back of the squad car, not even bothering to read her rights. This wasn't about law. It was about power. About showing her who was in charge. Would anyone stop him? Would anyone stand up and say that this wasn't right? People watched from their windows, some with phones in hand recording. But no one came out to help. No one dared to confront the officer. The street, once peaceful, now felt suffocating, as though the very air was thick with injustice. As they drove off, the young woman sat in the back seat, seething with anger.
If you've watched this far, comment which country you're watching from and leave a 100 in the comment section because you are type of person that likes to finish what they started. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to get notified whenever we drop new videos. Now back to the story.
How could this be happening? She'd always known this could happen, but to feel it firsthand, the coldness, the arrogance, the brutality, it was different. But something else simmered beneath the anger. Something the officer had no idea about. She wasn't powerless. Jake Miller had no clue that the woman he'd just handcuffed had one of the most powerful allies possible. Her mother, Captain Teresa Shaw, one of the most respected and feared officers in the city. And Captain Shaw wasn't the kind of woman who took kindly to corruption, especially when it involved her family. What happens when someone with real power gets involved? Can a corrupt cop truly outrun his own karma? The squad car pulled into the precinct and Jake stepped out, still wearing that smug grin as he dragged his prisoner along. It was like he was reliving one of his many past victories. But this time, he was about to face a very different kind of consequence. As soon as they walked inside the station, the atmosphere changed. The desk sergeant, Officer Daniels, looked up and immediately recognized the young woman. His face paled. "Jake, what the hell did you do?" Jake glanced at him, confused by the sudden tension in the room. "Just another routine arrest, Daniels. Why?" Daniels didn't respond. Instead, he quickly made his way to the back office. Within minutes, the door burst open, and Captain Teresa Shaw stormed into the room. Her face was a mask of fury, her steps swift and purposeful. Could the situation get any worse for Jake? How does a corrupt cop react when he realizes his entire world is about to implode? "Uncuff her, now." Captain Shaw's voice boomed through the station, her tone leaving no room for argument. Jake froze, his mind racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't how things usually played out. The power dynamic was shifting faster than he could process, and for the first time, real fear crept into his chest. "Did you hear me, Officer Miller? I said, uncuff my daughter. Now." The weight of that last word hit Jake like a freight train. Daughter. Her daughter. His hands fumbled as he rushed to unlock the cuffs, sweat forming on his brow. The young woman rubbed her wrists and stepped away from him, but she didn't say a word. Her silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. How does a bully cope when the tables are turned? How far will someone go to avoid the consequences of their actions? Captain Shaw didn't take her eyes off Jake. "You illegally detained and arrested my daughter. You didn't read her rights. You assaulted her without cause. Do you realize what you've done?" Jake's mouth went dry. I didn't know she was..." "Didn't know?" Captain Shaw interrupted, her voice laced with venom. "You didn't care. You've been doing this for years, haven't you? Targeting people who can't fight back. Well, now you've got someone who will." Jake took a step back, panic setting in. His career, his power, everything he'd built, it was slipping through his fingers. But it wasn't just fear of losing his job. It was the realization that he wasn't as untouchable as he thought. The days that followed were a nightmare for Jake. Captain Shaw launched a full investigation not just into the wrongful arrest of her daughter, but into Jake's entire career. Complaints that had been buried or ignored were dug up. Witnesses came forward, emboldened by the captain's determination to take him down. Could a single act of corruption unravel an entire career? How many lives had Jake destroyed before his own was brought to justice? It wasn't long before Jake found himself sitting on the other side of the interrogation table. His badge and gun taken away, the walls closing in. His arrogance, once his armor, had crumbled, leaving only shame and regret in its place. Karma had finally caught up with him. How many more are out there, waiting for their reckoning? How long can a system protect those who abuse it? And when will true justice be served for all? Tell us where you are watching from.